everyone, and welcome back to Next Gen Gaming SC. I'm your host, Josh Snyder, and today I have a tournament report for you from SCG CON Columbus this past weekend. There was so much excitement about this event. Leading up to this event, it was the first major event with the new Set 3 meta, and the first major event with no Boba Fett. So we start out with things on Friday. The 1K, 44 players. Jango Fett was the most represented leader in the field, and our top 8 had 7 different leaders. That's awesome, right? Great start right out of the gate. Very open, very diverse meta in the top 8. Jango was the only repeat leader. We had Anakin Blue, Emperor Palpatine, Yellow. We had Kira Green, Han 2 ECL, Quinlan Green, and a little bit of a surprise, Tarkin Blue. So we'll jump into the deck list here. Tarkin Blue. Now this Tarkin deck is going to play more like a soft control deck. It has that pretty common blue-green villainy soft control shell that we are used to at this point. But it also has a lot of extra small or cheap Imperial units that you can really take advantage of Tarkin's ability with. And that's going to give you some great board presence early. Could also put some pressure on the opponent, but it's going to help you get to the mid stages of the game where you have some great removal. And then we want to get to the late game where we can finish things off with Avenger. So great to see Tarkin here in the top 8. Moving on, we've got a new leader, Quinlan Voss, in the top 8. The first day of SCG CON Columbus. Now this more of a mid-range deck, very similar to the Han Green decks that we saw in the Set 1 meta. This particular list looks very similar to those, but we've got some new cards, of course. We've got the new R2-D2, which may be one of the best 2-cost units in the game. Hu Yang, General's Blade, Plo Koon. Plo Koon, arguably one of the better 5-cost units in the game. So some really strong new units. You've got a solid space presence in this deck with both Millennium Falcons and Bright Hope, which is going to certainly help in the matchup against Jango Fett. Now, one thing I do like here with Quinlan and General's Blade, you can flip Quinlan on 5 resources, play General's Blade on him, and then the next turn attack with him, and we can play out Home 1 with 6 resources, 2 turns early. Home 1 early, sign me up. So, very cool deck. And another thing, Plo Koon with U-Wing Reinforcement. Another super strong play. Of course, Han Solo off of U-Wing Reinforcement is great. But with Plo Koon there, if you find Plo Koon off of the U-Wing Reinforcement and you find another 1-drop to go with him, as long as you had 1 unit on the table, there you go. His coordinate is on. You've got another option at a 6th power ambush unit coming in. So Plo Koon, fantastic and even better with U-Wing Reinforcement. So that's Quinlan. And then we've got the only Han 2 to make the top cut over the weekend. Han 2 ECL. Now this deck is an aggro deck. This is a deck that wants to flood the board early, put a ton of pressure on as much as possible, and win the game fast. It can hit hard and it can hit fast. So looks similar to a lot of the Sabine ECL list that we see, but this list is really going in big on the cheap units. So there are a total of 15 1-cost units in this deck. So in theory, you could play 3 1-cost units on the very first turn of the game and put an insane amount of pressure. Open up with maybe Maz Kanata. Then you could use Han's action ability, get maybe R2-D2, Clone Deserter, or Soldier of the 501st down onto the board. They would survive past that 2 damage that Han's action ability would deal. And then you can play another 1-cost unit. Follow that up with the new 3-cost unit, Hu Yang on turn 2, and all of a sudden, things are looking pretty rough for your opponent. And it asks the question, can you answer this right now? So very cool to see Han 2 here, and then of course finish up with things like Poe Dameron or a Wrecker off of ECL. Very solid looking list and would be probably a lot of fun to play. Next deck, we've got Kira Green. Now, we saw a lot of Kira Green in Set 2 meta, but Sam proving to us at SCG CON Columbus that Kira is still relevant in the meta now. This is your Again, your soft control type build with that blue-green villainy package that we are used to, but we've got some new cards. We've got Rune Hako, which can be pseudo removal at certain stages of the game. Also, solid stats, right, with that 3 power, can be used to potentially trade into an opposing battlefield marine. Calculating Magna Guard, another solid 3-cost unit here for Kira. Can have Sentinel at multiple stages. So another option for Kira, another potential Sentinel option to give a shield to. We've got Perilous Position. Now, Perilous Position showed up in every blue deck that made the top cut over the weekend. And Perilous Position, or there were more copies of Perilous Position in the top cut throughout the 3 days at SCG CON Columbus than any other card. So Perilous Position is definitely one of, if not the best common card in Twilight of the Republic, and arguably one of the better cards in the set. So Perilous Position is there. Great card. And then you've got the Devastating Gunship. Now, the Devastating Gunship, to me, it almost feels like it was made for Kira. It has grit. A 3/5 baseline stats. Kira can deal 2 damage to it and put a shield on it. And now you have a 5/3 in space with a shield that can absolutely turn the tide in some matches. And of course, it can deal with some pesky, maybe space units that your opponent has, like 7th Fleet Defender, Kylos TIE Silencer, P-38 Starfighter, and others. So Devastating Gunship, I think, is going to be a staple card moving forward for Kira. Next on the list, we've got our first Django Tarkin Town. Now, this deck, there was a lot of noise surrounding this deck coming into this past weekend, when I think a couple weekends ago, you had Bobby Sapphire from KTOD win a store showdown with it. And then he showcased the deck on a YouTube video, and it's a super strong deck. And of course, the shell of this deck is essentially what Boba Tarkin Town was. We saw Boba Tarkin Town, the space deck, come into play and really make a big splash, especially towards the end of the Set 2 meta, having some very solid results at multiple planetary qualifiers. And that deck is very similar to the Boba deck. Of course, Django has replaced Boba. And there are also some cards in this list that help synergize with Django, or that synergize with Django and allow us to get the most out of his ability, like ISB Agent, Daring Raid. Now, Daring Raid is going to be good even without Django's ability, but it can be even better with Django. It can be a tempo play, right? If there's a unit you just have to exhaust, well, Daring Raid could do the trick paired up with Django's ability. Now, we've also got cards like Ruthless Raider. Raider was already in the Boba Tarkin Town deck, but this just synergizes so well with Django. And then you've got the new P-38 Starfighter, which feels like it was almost made for Django Fett. And then Heavy Persuader Tank, when played, deal 2 damage to a ground unit, so you can exhaust something there. And a really cool play you can make is Elite P-38 Starfighter and Ruthless Raider both have a when defeated ability, right? Heavy Persuader Tank has Exploit 2. So if you had Django Fett deployed, right, he's in play, unit side, you have the P-38 Starfighter and Ruthless Raider in play, you can play Heavy Persuader Tank, use the Exploit to defeat the P-38 Starfighter and Ruthless Raider. You're going to essentially get to exhaust the opponent's board, right? That's 3 units you get to exhaust between the when defeated ability on the Starfighter and Ruthless Raider, and then the when played ability on Heavy Persuader Tank. Now, again, you have to have Django Fett on the board. He has to be deployed to do that, but that is a crazy possible play you can make, and we saw that happen on Saturday, actually, with the Heavy Persuader Tank. Of course, you've got Vambrace Flamethrower on the sideboard. That is a fantastic card that synergizes very well with Django as well. You get that upgrade on Django Fett when he's deployed and essentially just, exhaust the opponent's ground arena. So this deck looks like a true contender, and I think it is here to stay moving forward. Next on the list, we've got Emperor Palpatine Yellow. Now, Palpatine really made a splash at the end of Set 1 meta. We saw a lot of double green Palpatine, and even early into Set 2 meta, but we saw some yellow variations as well. And here looks like a very solid list, and this deck did well. You've got the new P-38 Starfighter in this particular deck also. I think most yellow villain decks are probably going to have P-38 Starfighter. It just seems like a great card. Of course, it synergizes so well with Django, but I feel like it's going to have many different homes. And then a new 7-cost bomb for this deck, Cad Bane. So now Palpatine has 3 big-time 7-cost units that can completely swing the board and help you get to that late game where you can start throwing down things like Walker and Devastator, get your Palpatine flip, and just start really taking over the game. All right, so next we've got the second Django Tarkin Town deck in the top 8. This one just a little bit different from the first list. This one has Tyalin Fighter, so a couple extra 1-drops. Has that potential of going a little bit more wide than the other list did. Also has Swoop Down. Swoop Down can come in and take out one of those big threats your opponent has in the ground arena with one of your many space units and potentially keep your space unit on the board. So Swoop Down can be a very big momentum play at some stages. And then the deck that was your technical winner on Friday, because the top 8 did not play it out, so there were no top cut matches. They split. And your standings, well, those were the standings at the end of the 6 rounds of Swiss. And that was Christopher Lewis with Anakin Blue. There was a ton of hype for Anakin coming into the new meta. Anakin, I don't think it's a hot take. I think he is the best leader in limited play with Twilight of the Republic. He's just so good, right? He allows you to trade up, create so many value trades with his action ability, and then he flips and he's just an absolute beast. Now, the red-blue shell is pretty similar to what we've seen with the likes of like Han Blue, Han 2 Blue, and the set 2 meta, Ray Tarkin Town, and even back to Chirrut Tarkin Town in the first set. But we do have some new cards here. Not a new card, but one we didn't see a lot in the meta in set 2. We've got Kuil here. Kuil in the mix. I like seeing him here now in this particular build, and also Razor Crest, another card we didn't see a lot in the meta in set 2. But Razor Crest has 2 fantastic targets in this particular deck. You've got Jedi Lightsaber, and then you also have Perilous Position. So you have some S-tier upgrades that Razor Crest can go and get. So some great targets, and really cool to see Razor Crest in this deck. Also, it's another space unit that helps in that Django matchup. And then the built-in restore is going to help as well with the damage that you're putting on the base through Anakin's ability. But Obi-Wan's Aether Sprite, another card we want to point out. Very good card and helps with the space arena. But what Anakin can do is he can absolutely swing for an ungodly amount the turn that he flips, right? If you flip Anakin, you get Jedi Lightsaber on him. His base stats at that point are a 7-10. Now, he could have more power depending on how much damage you have on your base. And then let's say you can attack into an opponent's unit in the ground arena, and it gets defeated by the on-attack ability that Jedi Lightsaber has. All of the damage that Anakin would deal, his total amount of power, is going to still be dealt to the base through Overwhelm. Then, now that an enemy unit has been defeated, Bravado costs 2 less. You still have 3 open resources. You play Bravado. So on that one turn, I mean, I have not personally played the deck, although I'm very excited to take it for a spin. I have heard some players, they've hit for 20 plus damage in one turn with Anakin. And so this deck can just come out of nowhere. It can be behind and then all of a sudden swing the game around, and Anakin just hits like a truck. So yeah, I mean, this is such a strong deck. I think this is a real contender. Great finish on Friday. And I think this deck is really going to make a splash as we continue to move forward in this new meta. So now we move on to the main event for Star Wars Unlimited over the weekend. It was the 2K on Saturday. This particular tournament had 69 players, and this time around, Django had a little competition for being the most represented leader in the field. Sabine was right there with him. So Django and Sabine, the 2 most represented leaders on Saturday. There was a pretty big uptick in total number of Sabine decks played from Friday to Saturday. And then if we take a look at the top 8, this top 8 not quite as diverse as Friday's, but still pretty good. right? 6 different leaders in the top 8. Django goes from having 2 spots to 3 spots in the top 8. And we've got a Han 1 yellow, Anakin blue once again, Sabine ECL, Ray Tarkentown, and Kira Green finding its way into the top 8 once again as well. Now, I'm not going to go over each of these deck lists. There's been several other amazing content creators that have done some videos on the results from Saturday and put up those deck lists in the video. However, every single deck list from the top 8 on Friday, the top 8 on Saturday, and Sunday will be posted down, or the link will be posted down in the description below. So definitely check those decks out. But I do want to go over a few here within the video. We see Ray Tarkentown. This was the only Ray to make the top 8 over the weekend. This is very similar to the Ray Tarkentown decks we saw in set 2 meta, and it was the deck that eventually won the Greenville Planetary Qualifier, piloted by Joel Lee. This list, very similar, a few changes here and there, and we do see the inclusion of, I believe, 2 new cards in the whole deck, right? I was looking at the sideboard as well, but 2 new cards in the main deck. We've got Perilous Position, which again showed up in every blue deck that made the top cut, and then Senatorial Corvette, which, again, this is another space unit that can help compete in the space arena, but also a 5 power in the space arena can just be detrimental in some matchups and at some stages of different games. So, having a 5 power space unit could be the difference in winning or losing in some games. So we see a little bit of difference there, but essentially this is a good, solid red-blue mid-range hero deck that has a strong matchup into Sabine, and Sean proving to us that Ray still has a place in this meta. Now, I am curious because I don't know all of the different matchups that this deck had to go through during the day, but I would not be surprised if the uptick in Sabines throughout the field, that benefits Ray, and that could have benefited Sean, and good matchups, the right meta call, and all of a sudden you're in the top 8. So wouldn't be surprised at all if that definitely helped Ray on Saturday. Another deck we're going to look at is the only Sabine to make the top 8 on Saturday, Sabine ECL. Now, the main deck, this is very standard Sabine list here. No new cards in the main deck, but there is one new card in this deck, and it's one reason why I wanted to kind of point this deck out. Brain Invaders. So Quinn did it. He got to the top 8 with Brain Invaders. Now, if you didn't see the stream, McClunky Gaming streamed the 2K live on Saturday. You can check that out at their Twitch channel. They've also got the videos up now on YouTube. And the Brain Invaders really did invade the Twitch chat, and it was so interesting to see, and it created some good memories, I think, for many involved. And so, yeah, Quinn does it. He gets to the top 8 with Sabine ECL and Brain Invaders. But again, nothing new about this deck. General Dodonna is one of those cards that have kind of went in and out of Sabine lists. Good in the mirror match. But yeah, Brain Invaders in the top 8 with Sabine on Saturday. And then we'll take a look at the next deck in the top 8. We've got Han 1 Yellow. Now, this deck really took off at the beginning of the set 2 meta, and it's still here, and it's still very relevant. And this is a good, this deck has a good matchup into Sabine. And again, with this Han getting into the top 8, the uptick in Sabine across the field could certainly have played a role in the success that this Han deck had over the day, but not sure, don't know all the matchups that Philip had to go through. But this is a very solid deck, great tempo-oriented deck that can, it can disrupt your opponent's hand. It can disrupt your opponent's resources with DJ. Of course, it has the DJ Tech combo. And look, at the end of the day, Cunning for 4 resources is still really, really good and can just win some games. So Han 1 Yellow definitely still has a place in the meta. Does have a few new cards, the new R2-D2, which is, again, fantastic. Looks like we've got Plo Koon here as well, which, Most yellow hero decks are probably going to be including R2-D2, the new R2-D2, and Plo Koon. And then we've got Clear the Field in the sideboard, which is essentially another Waylay with a bit more of a stipulation to it. It only costs 2, but it can only return a unit that costs 3 or less to your opponent's hand. Now, if your opponent has a field of tokens, right, it would return each of them and would just wipe the board. So Clear the Field could be very good into some matchups. And then the last deck that we're going to take a look at here in the video is John's championship deck on Saturday, Django Tarkentown. This was your winner on Saturday, and very similar to what John ran on Friday, just a few changes. We see Mercenary Gunship, Vambrace Flamethrower, and Tie Advanced, those 3 cards finding their way into the main deck. Those were not in the main deck on Friday, so just a few small changes, but John showing us that this deck is a real contender and is something that you're going to have to prepare for moving forward. And now for the final event of the weekend, the Sunday 1K. The Sunday 1K had 40 players, and Anakin and Django were the 2 most represented leaders. So Django, the most represented leader throughout the 3 days of tournament play at SCG CON Columbus. And if you look at the top 8, another super diverse top 8 with 7 different leaders for the second time over the weekend. This time, Anakin was the repeat. 2 Anakin Blue decks made the top 8, and no Jango Fett decks. So you had Sabine ECL, Palpatine Yellow, Anakin Blue, Bosk Blue, another Anakin Blue, Luke Green, Quinlan Green, and Yoda Yellow. Now, a couple things to note here. The Sabine ECL that won this tournament was a standard Sabine deck. No new cards in that deck. Standard Sabine list that we had been seeing like at the end of set 2 meta. And this just seemed to work out well for Sabine. There was a lot more control decks in the field on Sunday, and Sabine ends up on top. Sabine won it all. Now, a couple other things to note. So going into this event, and really ever since Boba was banned, there was a lot of concerns that Sabine was going to be too good now that Boba was out of the picture. And looking at the results at SCG CON Columbus, I do not think that is the case. Sabine ran into some better matchups on Sunday, was able to have just the second top cut spot throughout the whole weekend, and took the win. But again, more favorable matchups this time around, as the Sabine deck does seem to struggle against Jango Fett, and there were less Jango decks in the field on Sunday. Another thing to note, Jango Fett. So Jango has big numbers on Friday and Saturday. 5 of the 16 top cut spots went to Jango Fett the first 2 days, and now we see no Jango. And Jango is very good. That deck is super strong and very relevant, but it is not going to be dominant like Boba was. And you may be asking, well, how do you know that? Well, here's kind of the proof that I would use. 2 of arguably the better, or maybe the 2 best Jango pilots throughout the weekend, John and Ryan, both made the top 8 Friday, made the top 8 again on Saturday. They were both within the top 4 both days. They were your finalists on Saturday, and Jango Fett ends up winning. John wins with Jango Fett. Both of those players played again on Sunday with the same deck. Now, maybe they made a couple changes, but they were still there with Django Tarkentown, made the top 8 the first 2 days, the finalists day 2, and now here on Sunday, they're not there in the top 8. So people adjusted, right? There were some adjustments made, and it just goes to show that the Django deck can be answered. It's very strong, but people can adjust to it, and we see that on Sunday with no Jango Fetts in the top 8. So the first list we want to look at from the top 8 on Sunday is Yoda Yellow. Now, Yoda is another one of those new leaders that had a lot of excitement built up around him, and people were really excited to build decks around Yoda and see if he was going to be relevant, and I think he is. And this is a great starting point for a yellow-blue Yoda deck. Looks super strong. A crazy force package in this deck. Every ground unit other than R2-D2 is a force unit. So now there are 2 of them. Becomes extremely viable in this deck. We can get out, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon on turn 2. We can get out Obi-Wan on turn 3, Luke on turn 4. So we can get all of these units out 2 turns early with now there are 2 of them, and you're pretty much always going to be able to have a force unit in play with the sheer number of force units in this deck. Now, we do see some new cards. Of course, the R2-D2, which again is probably going to be in almost every yellow hero deck moving forward for the foreseeable future. Padawan Starfighter, another new unit, a space unit. And with the amount of force units in this deck, the vast majority of time it's going to be a 2/4, and that's going to be great into the Jango Fett matchup. We've also got Ahsoka Tano. We've got Hello there. You've got, of course, now there are 2 of them, which goes so well with the force package that we have. And then we have Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite, another unit that you could potentially still get out a bit early as well. So yeah, I mean, this deck looks really solid. You've got the 2 new 5-cost ground units, Ki-Adi-Mundi and Plo Koon. And this deck can explode, right? This deck, with now there are 2 of them, You're My Only Hope. It can high roll extremely well and explode out of nowhere. Looks like a very fun list to play. And I know I'm excited to try it out and excited to see where the Yoda builds go from here. But it's great to see Yoda in the top 8, the final tournament of the weekend at SCG CON Columbus. And then the next deck we're going to take a look at is Luke Green. Now, I'm not 100% sure on this. I did not talk to Phil, but I would be willing to bet that this was a meta call because Luke Green seems so strong into Jango Fett because Luke can just throw shields around on his units. And that just completely nullifies what Jango Fett is trying to do because it has to deal the damage to be able to exhaust. So Luke seems like a very strong counter to Jango, and the fact that there were so many Jango Fetts in the field Friday and Saturday, and Jango making up, more top 8 spots than any other leader throughout the first 2 days. I think this may very well have been a meta call, and it worked out as Phil makes the top 8 with it. Very similar to the Luke decks that we saw a lot of in set 1 meta, a little bit in set 2. We've got, of course, Perilous Position here. We also have 3 copies of General's Blade, which, both of these upgrades are extremely good. So we've got lots of different options to make Luke huge, right, with Luke's lightsaber or General's Blade. And we can get out Home 1 early. We can get out Luke Skywalker early. So lots of good plays here. Pretty standard package for blue-green. We do see Barriss Offee, Perilous Position, General's Blade. So a few new cards. But yeah, I think this was a meta call. And I think it worked out really well because Luke is going to be a great deck if you are expecting to face a lot of Jango Fett. The final deck we will take a look at here from Sunday is Bossk Blue. This is the hard control version. We saw Bossk Blue really do well in set 2 meta, won some big events. Of course, you're able to do some really great things when Bossk is deployed. If you can double up on Death Mark, draw a handful of cards, double up on top target, heal just a ton of damage. But pretty standard blue-red hard control package here. We've got ways to finish the game off late with Supreme Leader Snoke and Avenger. And you can also just mill your opponent with Vigilance, and you have restocks. You can get that Vigilance back. And then if you're in the hard control mirror match, you can bring in Bounty Hunter Crew out of the sideboard. So yeah, this deck still very relevant, and there was a definite uptick in control. The total amount of control decks played on Sunday, and We saw 2 in the top 8, Emperor Palpatine and Bosk Blue. And so, yeah, Bosk Blue still making a splash in the meta. And before we go, we'll take a look at the total top 8 numbers for the weekend. 13 different leaders made the top 8. Django, the most represented. Django had 5 spots, 5 of 24 top cut spots over the weekend, just a little over 20%, followed by Anakin with 4, so those two very close. But keep in mind, Anakin was the only leader that made the top 8 in all 3 events, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The only leader to do that because Django missed out on Sunday. And we see Kira, Palpatine, Quinlan, and Sabine all had 2. And then Han 1, Han 2, Rey, Tarkin, Bosk, Luke, and Yoda all made 1 appearance in top cuts over the weekend. So at least 4 or more leaders from all 3 sets represented in the top cuts over the weekend. So I think this is a very healthy meta. It feels open. There's some new stuff floating around. We love to see it. And there's still some more to explore in this new meta. Keep that in mind. We are going to see some more new decks pop up, and I can't wait to see it. But a great opening weekend of the new meta, no doubt. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's been a blast bringing you this tournament report. Thank you guys so much for all the support. Stay tuned for some very exciting news here on the channel at Next Gen Gaming SC. May the Force be with you, and until next time, take care.